Hey everyone, it's Melissa from Welcome to the Woods. Today we're going to get started on my next big project, which is remodeling this bathroom in the main level of my home. It is a 3/4 bath and the shower in this space is so crammed in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch it around a bit. I'm going to redo this vanity in this video, but in the future I'm also going to be reconfiguring the layout. So this vanity was painted and I knew that underneath was wood. So my goal was to strip and sand and refinish it to bring it back to its former wooden glory. Now, there were a few issues with the paint job besides nicks and scratches. It also built up the drawers so that they didn't slide as nicely, and like the doors also didn't close very well. So I'm really excited to get all the layer of paint off and just get it looking great again. So the first thing to do was obviously empty out all of the drawers. And in this video, I want to test out something I wondered about for quite a while, which is whether or not acetone would strip paint off of wood as easily as a typical stripper that you buy in the store. So I'm going to be using both products, both the clean strip stripper, which is probably the most common one you find. It works in 15 minutes. And then I'll also be putting that against acetone, which really disintegrates pretty much any paint finish. So I'm going to start with a clean strip stripper, and this is kind of a gel, but you're still going to want to put it on really thickly, and I always keep around just like old cheap paintbrushes to use for a circumstance like this where I don't care if it really gets ruined. So I'm going to glob that on, move it all around, and then my trick is to cover it in saran wrap. The saran wrap does two things. It keeps the stripper moist longer so that it's activating and pulling up the paint more effectively. And then it also kind of stops the smell a bit because this stuff can be really stinky, but when it's covered in saran wrap, it's just not as nauseating. Be sure that you do this in a well-ventilated area. When I had to do it in the small bathroom, I closed the door and I opened the window so that the fumes didn't really get throughout my house. Now the acetone is such a thin liquid, I wasn't really sure how I was going to get it onto the paint job. So at first I tried to just like rub it on with a soaked rag, but then I realized very quickly like that wasn't gonna do it, and so I found a metal pan that I just didn't use anymore, and I filled that with acetone, and then I flipped the drawer upside down and just set it right in the solvent. After several minutes had passed, you could see the paint lifting up, and both the stripper and the acetone were working beautifully, so it was time to scrape. Now I'm going to take off the saran wrap and scrape the stripper first. You can see that all of the latex paint kind of came off in one big glob together, so it was very, very effective. But I would say that this was just because I put on a lot of product, and it's unlikely you'd be able to get these results, especially with like a vertical surface. So I just used a lot of stripper here, and it ate through so many layers. Now here I'm using a metal putty knife to scrape it, but it probably would be better if you use plastic or you're just really careful, because the stripper does soften the wood, so it's kind of easy to scratch the surface and make a dent in the wood if you're not careful. When I picked up the drawer out of the acetone soak, the paint literally fell off. It just started coming off right away, and when I scraped, most of the gray latex paint came off, but there was some remnant white primer on there that also easily came off with the scraper. Now this definitely did not make the wood nearly as soft, so I felt more comfortable scraping the wood in this circumstance, but overall I would say the acetone also worked quite well. So my little comparison in stripping products actually had very similar results. This is the acetone. You can see that the drawer has almost all the paint and primer completely off of it with just a small amount of scraping. And then the clean strip stripper was also basically free from finish when I was done. So one thing I'll say though is that although they had similar results, I would say the acetone's probably a little more economical, because the small amount of acetone that I threw in the pan, I was able to scrape out the latex paint globs and then reuse again. So I just put another drawer right in and it's good to go. Now let's move on to actually stripping the vanity cabinet inside the bathroom. I took off the drawers of the middle cupboard, and yes, the floor in here is super nasty. Don't worry, I have a plan for that later. But the rest of this is just a vertical surface I'm gonna have to try and use the gel stripper on. So I laid down protection for the floor and I got to work. At first, I attempted to just brush this on with the paintbrush and not cover it in saran wrap, thinking that my saran wrap would just fall off on the vertical surface. But this really did not work well. You can see here I'm trying super hard to scrape off the paint and it just did not bubble up. So I went back to my tried and true plastic wrap situation, but the way I got it to stick on the vertical surface of the vanity is by putting the stripper product on really in small sections and then putting the saran wrap on right away so that the product was super wet and it just kind of stuck on there. Stripping is really not a fun job. It's stinky and extremely messy, and it can be quite labor intensive if you're not using enough product. But I guess my go-to is to always just do another layer of product if it's not coming off easily. So with the saran wrap method, the product started to come off much easier, and there were just a couple spots that I needed to do a second coat of stripper on in order to get pretty clean before sanding. So when I was sanding, I started with an 80 grit, I moved to a 120 grit, and then I did a 180 grit. And stepping up your grits with sanding is the fastest way to get a nice finish. You don't want to just go over it again and again and again with like an 80 grit till it's all perfect, because it's actually less efficient this way. And of course I'm using a random orbital sander so that it does not show marks on the wood, but in the corners where my random orbital sander couldn't reach, I use a little mouse sander, which is actually just an attachment on my oscillating multi-tool. This tool is super useful. If you don't have one, I highly recommend getting one, and I'll link all the products and tools I'm using in this video in the description. Sanding really did take a lot of time, especially since the paint job was so sloppy and there was paint on the backs of the cupboard doors, there was paint on the sides of each drawer I sanded off, and I even used my mouse sander on the tiny little lip along the edge of each drawer front just to be meticulous. And I wanted these drawers to really be refurbished perfectly in a way that nobody would ever realize that it was once painted. Now you might be wondering why I went through the effort of stripping instead of just sanding from the get-go. In my opinion, when you're bringing something back to the wood finish, it is easier to use stripper before sanding instead of just trying to sand through layers and layers and layers of paint. I used a little hack to fill the blemishes that were on the vanity using wood glue in them and then filling them with the fine sawdust from my random orbital sander. This method is similar to if you were to mix the wood glue and the sanding sawdust into a putty and mush it in, but I just think that doing it this order allows it to stay in a little better, and when you sand it flush, it looks like there was nothing ever there. One of the cupboard doors had a blemish as well, but this one really posed a problem for me because it was filled with this bright white filler to get the door to be flush. I actually think this is why the vanity was painted in the first place, because this gouge was missing out of the wood door. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my artistic skills to match the color of the sanded wood and actually paint that little piece of white to blend in and make it look like there's nothing there. Now my goal in stripping this vanity and refinishing it is to get it to this beautiful light wood modern color. So I'm mixing up a whitewash now, and I'm just taking regular white acrylic paint and putting a little bit of it into a cup of water. And I didn't measure anything here, I just kind of arbitrarily created this whitewash. Since all the wood is sanded, it's going to accept this whitewash into its grain and actually shift the color of the wood. Now the reason I'm adding this step is because the light wood color that I'm going for won't really come through if I don't whitewash it. When you sand wood and then you seal it with a poly, the poly kind of brings it back to its like natural color. But if you whitewash it before sealing, then it keeps that look of freshly sanded wood that I'm going for. The whitewash simply has to sit on the wood grain for about 10 minutes, and then I just wipe off the excess with a rag. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it made a big difference, but if you compare like one drawer that I've done with another drawer, you can see that the whitewash really cuts out the yellow or red undertone of whatever wood you're working on. This step just makes it more neutral, and I would say it's a must if you're trying to go for that natural wood look. Once the whitewash had fully dried, it was time to come in with the poly layer, and I'm using this product, the One Coat Polyurethane from Minwax. Even though polyurethane is usually oil-based and ambers over time, I chose this product because it is water-based and promises to not amber. I've only used it on one other project, and I was happy with it because the one coat coverage means you can get just as much protection as 3 coats of the regular poly product with only 1 coat of this stuff. So it is something that I would recommend if you want to give a new varnish a try. Now I apply poly with a foam roller so that it eliminates any brush strokes, and I'm doing this even on the vertical surface of the vanity, just using a little paintbrush to catch any poly drips that might end up on the edges. It's also important, as with most finishes, that you apply your poly with the grain of the wood. So I'm following the lines of the wood even on these drawers where it would probably be faster to go the other direction. Okay, so you remember earlier when I showed you that nasty bottom of the vanity inside the cupboard doors? This area really was well loved and probably sustained a few water leaks during its time. So I'm going to try and cover it. And at first I tried to use a peel and stick vinyl like paper, and this I thought was going to be the perfect solution to make it look brand new, but for some reason or another the vinyl adhesive, it just did not stick. So I got it all cut and laid in place and ended up just ripping it up. Instead, I used this product, which I just had in my arsenal of random products in my basement, and it's like a stain and water sealer, and so I just sprayed this on. It's meant for like ceilings, but I'm sure it'll work great in a spot like this. The white vinyl shelf liners did work well though for the inside of the drawers. They had liners in them originally that I pulled off that were like smelly because they were so old. I don't know when this vanity was built, but I'm sure it's been in this house for decades by now. When I pulled off the old liners, it left a sticky adhesive I just could not sand or get rid of, so the bottom of these drawers need a new liner to cover that up. Once I got the vinyl roll cut to size for each drawer, I simply used an X-Acto knife to cut off the excess, and it looks like they are brand new. So for the moment, I'm going to reattach the hardware that was on this vanity, even with the new finish. But I'm thinking I'm going to be shopping for something new in the whole bathroom reveal coming up. So if you could help me out by commenting below what you think would look best on this vanity. Do you like the finish of satin nickel, which is what is going to be some of the faucets in the room and stuff? Or do you think I could go high contrast and go with a matte black for the hardware? I'm definitely thinking I'm going to do pulls instead of knobs, but I'd love your help deciding on the finish. So if you could comment below, that would help me so much. Last, it was time to fill all the drawers back up, and especially the area where the cupboards were and that staining was on the bottom of the vanity, it looks drastically better. So I hope that you were impressed with this total makeover of our vanity. I really had fun stripping and sanding and refinishing this piece. Don't forget to subscribe and follow along so you can see everything else that I'm up to. We're going to be removing the shower in this 3/4 bath, moving the toilet. I'm going to be building some cabinets for more storage, replacing the vanity top, and doing lots of painting. So much more to come. Be sure to follow along. Welcome to the woods, and we'll catch you again next time.